The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as personal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional or expert in the relevant field for personalised advice tailored to your specific situation.
I grew up in not so fortunate circumstances, so I've always been very selective of who I keep around myself or who I pick as part of my team. I always try to sniff to see if people are practicing what they preach, I guess. So if I'm going to pick someone, are they doing it themselves?
It's important to get a range of different perspectives. There's no shame in asking different people with different functional expertise to take a position on a problem to solve. I think you see a lot of small business owners putting together a virtual board of directors for their business, someone representing law, someone who's an accountant, someone who's a mortgage broker. There's no reason why we as individuals, when we treat our own balance sheet and wealth, shouldn't put a similar team together as well.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wealth Guide podcast, sponsored by Ryker Capital. I'd love to introduce myself. I'm new to the team, but not new to the financial planning industry. My name is Tamara Story, and I'm the Advice Practice and Growth Manager. Very excited to have three gentlemen on the couch joining me today, and I might just go around the couch and have each of you introduce yourselves, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. My name's Hung. I'm from Strategic Brokers. I'm the founder and director. Been in, I guess, the finance game for about 14 years. And I guess I was an accounting major prior to that. Probably interesting or more fun fact is I used to run nightclubs for a living and live poker tournaments.
Wow. Quite a career change.
Hi guys, my name is Desoukey, Senior Financial Planner at Ryker Capital. I've been in the banking industry for around about 13 years, so time flies when you're having fun. And I've been an advisor for just under 10 as well. So a little fun fact about me is I don't know why, but I'm afraid of heights. No matter how much I try to shake it off, no matter what I do, I'm still afraid of heights.
I'm an idiot like you. I'm afraid of heights, but I decided to do the Macau bungee once, which is the highest bungee in the world.
Man, you know what I did? I actually tried to do as well the slingshot mission in the Easter show.
Yeah.
I did. I loved it, but then I was still scared of heights, so can't shake it off.
Yeah.
I have a more rational fear, spiders.
Oh, wow.
I grew up with tarantulas in South America, so I think I got a little bit spooked then, and that left a lasting impact.
I've got both your fears then.
I was going to say I do as well, so there we go. Very relatable.
John Alvarez from FinSelect Group, 15 years as an advocate for small to medium enterprise, both in the corporate sector, in the lending space, as well as a broker. At the moment, we're working quite heavily in regards to advocating on behalf of small businesses, looking at new products and trying to be a little bit more disruptive in the marketplace.
Very exciting. Thank you, gentlemen. I think this is, a great brain trust on the couch today. Our topic today is what is going on in the property market. Australians, we have a lot of wealth tied up in property. I myself have been fortunate enough to buy 2 properties in Sydney. I do have an adult child who is looking to get into the property market and really struggling with the rent that she's paying as well. So really excited to hear from the people on the couch. Let's get some ideas and some examples. Hopefully that'll help me as well as you guys who are watching too. So Hung, I might start off with, we hear about the fixed rate mortgage cliff. We've been hearing about that for months now. Do you mind just kind of giving us some context? Exactly what is it and where are we at with that? Are we almost through it or just some context?
I guess during COVID, there was, obviously interest rates dropped to rock bottom and the banks were offering very, very attractive fixed rates. So, with the rates as low as 1.79%, 1.89, 1.99, I think I sold that product pretty much as every single customer got that product. It was a 4-year fix for most of them, but a lot of them are coming off 2 and 3 year fix, off the back end of that. So a lot of customers right now are coming off those fixed rates. So, from their repayments being, let's call it 2,000 a month, they're all of a sudden jumping to anything up to, 3,000, 4,000, depending on, what type of structure they will put up in. If it's an interest only loan, for instance, and it's rolled into a principal and interest and attracted a new rate, there's a huge jump in repayments. So the cliff is, I guess, basically all the fixed rates coming off in the short form.
That's what the cliff is. Okay. Are we almost through that period or do you have any idea of where we're at?
Yeah, look, I think the 4-year fix that a lot of people took up, they're all coming up next year. But is that the bulk of it? I think the bulk of it were the 2 to 3 year fix. So we are coming off it now. So it's almost through. I think by the end of probably next year, everyone's finished up with all those, super, below 2% fixed rates. And, between, I guess, depending on who they went to, if they went to their bank directly or they have a really good broker or somebody who's looked after them, the person should be having these conversations now with them to talk about what the strategy is coming out.
That's a good segue. That's a good segue. I might go over to John if that's okay with you. So maybe let's go into, that was an excellent context. So real life people you've dealt with that may have been coming to you, coming off these rates, John.
A lot of the people that I'm working with are small business owners, and they are seeking more surety around their cash flows. So in order to get surety around cash flows, they need to understand what their expenses are, what their liabilities are, what the repayments are. So often their cash flows are muddled, their personal cash flows are muddled with their business cash flows. So there's no, there's a grey space. So when we look at a small business customer, we're looking at both sides of the fence in terms of what their liabilities are for their personal, the residential property, as well as their business assets and liabilities associated with those assets. At any moment in time, I mean, all small businesses, cash flow is king. And if we are able to drive costs out by refinancing debt and achieving, I guess, more surety. And it doesn't mean, it doesn't relate back to getting a cheaper rate, but just getting a better understanding of what the repayments may be and what their expenses, what the outflow of cash will be over the course of the next 12 months. If that makes sense. I think that was a little bit of a wordy response.
No, it does. It does. So it sounds to me from what you've come here, if you're a small business person, it's like this thing is on steroids because we've got a business and we've got your personal finances as well. Yeah. So that's really massive. Dean, I'm sure you have clients that are coming to you facing this as well. Either, I don't know, people on ongoing service arrangements with you, or can you give me a bit of context of some real life people who are facing this that have come to you?
Yeah, sure. Like I've personally had a couple of my clients, especially even if I'm consulting with a new client, one of the biggest household expenses is the mortgage. And that obviously does take a lot of their cash flow. So it's very, very important and imperative that they have that regularly reviewed to make sure that they're pretty much paying a rate where it's obviously going to be competitive. Because once again, I think the banks make billions of dollars a year. So anything we can do to help our clients and put money back into their pockets to actually pay down that debt is actually very imperative to the clients.
You guys both brought up cash flow is king, whether you're in business or your home finances. That's cash flow is king as well. Hung, people coming to you, decisions on fixed versus variable, what are the kinds of things you're talking to clients about that decision process when they're coming to you in this period of time?
Yeah, so when it comes to fixed rates, we've always been on, I guess, the page of, don't fix a rate to beat the banks, right? So people coming to you going, look, we're going to try and beat the banks by fixing a rate. Well, that's not the whole point of fixed rates. Fixed rates are there to give you security, peace of mind for a fixed period of time. You might have life events, are coming up. It could be, it could be anything. I don't know. You might have something that's going on in your life and you go, well, for the next 2 to 3 years, I actually need to know exactly what that's going to be because I might be working for 3 days a week until I'm going to go back to 5 days. So for the next, 2-3 years, I need that security. So if you're going to fix a rate, do it for the right reasons. And the right reason is, to know what you're going to be paying. The market itself, I think I was in a luncheon the other day and they were saying 90% of the market is variable or taking variable rates at the moment. So there's only really 10% fixing. And those guys that are fixing are really looking for peace of mind.
Exactly. For maybe a client, again, over to you, John, who is also a business owner, similar logic or something
exactly
different?
The same logic. It's about getting peace of mind, surety of what they're going to be spending over the next 12 months. Often they're making business decisions on the back of having that understanding of what their repayments will be. So do I invest in the business? Do I start to drive cost out by looking to refinance? How can I get access to credit? And I think if you look at the importance of credit and capital for small business, it's critical. 70% of businesses will look to refinance or seek new capital, most of them for growth, over the next 12 months. So that's a significant level of demand for capital. But something that we can't avoid is that the biggest anchor on a balance sheet for a small business owner is their personal home, is their residential home. You can't look at one and not avoid the other, if that makes sense. it's a critical part to that decision making as to how do I grow, where do I access capital, can I tap into capital and release capital from my home, and how can I continue to drive costs down on a repayment level.
That does make a lot of sense. And similarly too, and I think I'm going to go to you now, Dean, for clients who are seeing you for financial planning, they've got a mortgage, like you said before, and it can be a very big expense. They also have other goals for their money. Have you got an example of a client where, you know what I mean, you really had to balance that out, and how did you manage that with regards to other strategies and other uses for the money that you've got in place for your client?
Yeah, look, funny enough, I've actually got a client that I've seen recently, and she's on the later ages of her journey towards retirement. She's actually 67, and she's still got a bit of a bigger, larger mortgage. She's got around about 360,000, and her priority at the moment now is, given that she wants to start to slow down from a work perspective, still having that large debt, it's important for her to continue to start looking at, and I'm helping her with strategies to continue paying down the debt. She's got a pretty good cash surplus, so we're just looking at strategies and help paying down the debt. And then also as well, she's looking at downsizing. Given her situation, as much as she would like to obviously stay with where she's at, I think it's a little bit challenging for her. So she's looking at downsizing and significantly reducing the debt that she has at the moment now to something that's going to be a lot more attainable. So in the next couple of years, when she wants to retire, she can retire debt free.
Well, right. And very similar to the business, she's got to be thinking about, am I also doing contributions into super? You know what I mean? And then when I'm going from accumulating, going to retire, what am I doing with that money too? So a really big, a lot of similarities, to that kind of a client as well.
Well, interesting you make that point. I mean, super is very much a secondary for small business owners. They really, they pay themselves minimum. So other investment classes, other asset types is what they're seeking. Property is a big one, commercial property, reinvesting back into their business, acquiring new businesses. Capital for growth is critical, but things like super become a secondary point. I don't know what you guys are finding with many of your small business owners, but when we raise the prospect of super, it's not on their radar.
Look, I find all of the businesses I look after, especially in their first growth years, right? They don't put anything in super.
No.
And for the reason they do that is because they need that cash flow.
That's right.
Right. So they're not going to dump that extra 50 grand between them and their partner. Doesn't make sense. They need that to then make more money than to be able to produce and get to the next level. But I find they start dumping in at a later stage, but then, is that the right thing? Are they missing out on opportunities to maximize?
That's a perfect question. I was going to segue into that as well. Do you have some comments on that, Dean?
It ultimately all depends on the stage that the business is in. I think exactly what you're both saying, where especially in the startup phases, cash flow is definitely going to be king. So obviously sometimes within the new businesses, clients don't have too much flexibility around adding money back into super. The main concern is just keeping that business running. But once the income starts and the business starts to really boom, then obviously superannuation is such a great tax effective strategy to not only help them from an income tax perspective, but at the same time as well start really preserving and preparing them on the later stages of retirement. And there's so many different things that you could potentially look at doing, and something as simple as, especially around commercial property and all that type of stuff, some clients, and we've had clients moving down the avenue of a self-managed super fund.
I was going to say that's quite popular.
Structuring it there,
and moving into commercial property and owning the commercial property via the super fund is something that we're seeing a lot.
Correct. Because one of the benefits of it as well is you can obviously use the business income to obviously pay down the debt, given that it'll obviously be rented out and things like that. And your additional contributions of what you're paying in, the government's giving you a tax offset to pay more money down on the debt. So it's a win-win situation for the client.
Excellent. No, thanks very, very much. I'm going to switch tacks a little bit. I have heard, and it's kind of like, if you think about it, we came through the pandemic and there was a bit of a roller coaster. Of course, we had lockdown, we had remote working, and we had those, as we said before, the 12 consecutive hikes in interest rates. And it was kind of like the market, is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to crash and then come back up again? So some people I've heard, look at, I'm going to sit on the sidelines. There's going to be a major market correction and I'm going to try to bag a bargain. Now, I hear that a lot. I've heard over the last couple of years. In general, good approach, not a sound approach, things to be concerned about thinking that way. Hung, what do you think?
Everyone,
Everyone has
I know
a-
you
Everyone
don't
has-
have a crystal
no,
ball.
no one has a crystal ball, but if you're looking for that big crash and burn, that happened in, I guess, December. Was that last year? I think it was.
yeah.
That was where, like, was it the crash and burn? Really, it corrected itself. That's what it did, right? It didn't crash and burn. There was just obviously the really quick spike up in rates, caused some friction in the market. People weren't listing properties, and the ones that were listed were only the leftover stock that nobody wanted, or people were desperate to sell. So you're seeing this, price correction, but it doesn't reflect true data in my eyes. It's only, the only stock on the market were the ones that were like leftover, residual, or investor stock that people bought as pure investments, not homes. The market did take that dip, but it was more just correcting from that bloody heat that it had.
Well, the other factor, you make an excellent point. The other factors to consider is the supply and demand. I mean, demand for housing in the eastern states, and I have to say also in the western states, is through the roof. I mean, immigration, migration, interstate migration is kicked off. We just don't have enough housing. And if we look at, say, the pipeline of new developments coming into places like Sydney, everything's slowed up. Cost of building's gone up, interest rates have slowed construction, access to resources. So we don't have new stock coming to market. That will push pricing.
Yeah, nobody's building at the moment.
No.
You go call your tradie and he's charging, $180 an hour. So it's coming back, but it's actually starting to correct. But that will take time to correct itself before construction pushes out and fills up, that void that we're going to have in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Well, I think so too. No, thank you very much for that. I think it's similar to, and if you don't mind commenting as well, Dean, with regards to trying to time the market, not just with property, but with other types of investments. Do you have that challenge with clients as well?
Look, I think once again, like you pretty much pointed out, we don't have a crystal ball. I think it all comes down to buying something fit for purpose. And at the end of the day, especially property, it's ultimately a long-term investment. So it's something that you're going to hold on for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, of which any asset class, whether we talk about shares, even having money in cash, right? The market's always going to fluctuate. It always changes. But if we look at what history shows, over time, the value of everything is obviously going to go up. So you will still have that capital growth.
I think you also, like for us, for myself anyway, personally, like you live and you learn. I think in my early days of investing, when you're trying to build something, you're always looking for that, like, let's make money quickly. You're always trying to find that quick grab. So I've done a lot of mistakes in my early investing, I've probably been involved in close to 20 transactions personally now. And like going through that, and I've noticed how much better I got at understanding, the property itself. I think the first few, you're all just trying to get as much growth as you can. So you're trying to get that fast win, but it's not always the best strategy, right? Did I ever sell any of those first properties while I was trying to get a good quick win? I've still got them. So the long-term investment, people forget that, even if you're cash flow negative today, right? No, we're not talking about negative gearing or the rest of it. If you're cash flow negative today, people forget rents go up, values go up, rents go up, values go up, interest rates fluctuate. And over a long, long term, if you buy a good asset, that's just going to keep growing. And the demand for it is going to outstrip any of these fast growth strategies.
I'm feeling like there's a bit of opportunity cost by not getting into the market when you can.
Yeah,
is that what I'm picking up 100%. From you guys?
Yeah, you need time in the market, really. That's really
rather than time in the market.
Yeah, and the right, I guess, vehicle, right? That's
Well, that you've segued very, very well, and I appreciate that. I was wondering, has there been a shift in preferences and locations for people looking for properties, maybe to not only live in and invest in, probably a little bit of both since the pandemic? Have you noticed some switches up there or changes there, John?
We're still working quite heavily with developers around subdivisions, around the fringe and growth corridors. Okay. Now, the reason why developers have come back into that space is because the demand for the traditional block and house, your Australian dream, is still quite strong. There's a lot of high density stock still in the city. That's quickly picking up. The returns are increasing and improving, attracting more investors coming into that type of asset class. But the traditional, say 400, 500 square metre block with a nice home, that's still quite strongly in demand, particularly in the growth corridors where you get immigrant families, you get new communities popping up, new infrastructure being invested in. So that's quite popular.
How about you, Dean? Are you finding that are any of your clients still working, hybrid, working remote, wanting to invest, moving to regional areas? Is that changing their strategies? What are you finding?
Yeah, I think after COVID, it has made a significant change with the way that obviously everyone works these days. I can give you a simple example as well. I had one of my clients that was living near Asheville, so just not too far from here, and after everything, she's moving to Lithgow. So working online, she doesn't have to go into the office as much. So she's working online, and like there's other colleagues that I know of as well where they live in the Central Coast. They come down to Sydney 1 day a week, 2 days a week, if anything, and the majority of the rest of the time they're just working from home. So people, given how expensive the market has gone here within Sydney, people are naturally now starting to venture out to further other areas out to buy something a little bit cheaper, and they're still working, still doing.
But it's also the cost of living has increased. You know, public transport, utilities, everything's just become much more expensive. So you're right. Places like the Central Coast, Wollongong, Newcastle have become attractive for families.
And attractive for investing as well, investment properties. Is that what we're talking about too? Yeah.
Well, I've noticed this is probably completely different, but I've seen a lot of people from Sydney selling up and then moving to Brisbane, right? So you know, you're cashing in a really affluent suburb. To give you an example of maybe a live case, I've seen a client of mine cash in Freshwater for $4.5 million, and they're buying a waterfront for $2.5 million in Brizzy, left over with close to $2 million change. And they don't need to work in Sydney no more.
You're making it sound very attractive.
Yeah, very attractive, right? So then what they did is then they went and bought in Brizzy, and then you got the guys in Brizzy, their prices then shot up.
Yeah,
and guess what the Brizzy guys are doing? They're cashing out at $2.5 million, and they're going to WA. So they're buying waterfronts whole beachside for 1.4, 1.3, and we've left over change as well. So you're kind of seeing this shift in migration,
Or up the coast. I mean, that's something else that's happening in Queensland, where we're seeing the sunny coast now become a popular destination because it's cheaper than, say, the Gold Coast or Brisbane.
And got better weather there too.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds good. Let's then this sounds really exciting. Let's pull it back to, I'm curious about first home buyers. So I know there is, like I said earlier, I do have an adult child trying to get into the property market in Sydney. She's renting in Sydney and she's finding her rent is going up as well. Are you finding, I might go to you first of all, Hung, are you finding you're doing business with first home buyers 2023? Are you able to, how are people getting into the market? What are some strategies?
Yeah, so we're getting a lot of first home buyers lately, actually, funny enough. And, I've got my brother in the business who's young himself, he's, what's he now? He's 24 years old. And so all of his clients that are coming in, they're all first home buyers, right? So, and he lives in the western suburbs. So they're in the, the fringe suburbs of, where they're developing Leppington, Austral, that kind of pocket where they're releasing land subdivisions all the time. Look, the government has released a lot of new things since, July 1st. They've increased the caps on first home buyers, increased the stamp duty waivers. So the entry as a first home buyer, it's become a lot more attractive for under that 900 grand space. But the problem they're all facing as first home buyers is also the income cap. So they've got an income cap on that. So the borrowing capacity isn't there to get to that level. Right. So this is where they're struggling. They've got to increase that income cap, I think. Yeah. And, because you need a lot more money to be able to buy a house under $1 million, right? So
how are people doing that? Are they?
Yeah. So I live on the northern beaches. I grew up in the western suburbs. So I have friends in both pockets, so I see both sides of the world. In the northern beaches, there's a lot of help from parents. In the west, there's help from parents in the guarantor space. In the northern beaches, they get 500 grand deposits. not always, but bank of mum and dad. Bank of mum and dad.
There is a bank of mum and dad.
There is a lot of bank of mum and dad, and I can tell you that firsthand. I've seen as substantial as $2 million deposits and gifted from family members. But different worlds. Yeah, it is a different world. So bank of mum and dad, then it's mum and dad as guarantor. As a guarantor, yep. Because it's so hard to get in, there's been a big shift from the traditional method of getting into their first property, is the one they live in, to a lot of people turning into rent investors or staying with mum and dad for a long time. and then getting in by getting their first investment property instead and foregoing those first home buyer grants. You know, sometimes you're trying to target those grants so hard that you forget what you're actually trying to achieve. And people are like, well, let's get those grants because they're good value, right? And that might be your position. You might have to take a grant because your deposit's so small, you've got no guarantor. So that's your first position to get in. And that's so it. But no one's case is the same, you know. But that guarantor is actually a really good one. But your parents really need to understand what they're signing up for, as well as the customer, because if they buy a crappy property, it might be very hard to get them out of that, you know. So it's really important about that asset that they buy in there as well.
Yeah, understanding and managing the risk that's involved in that as well is
100%.
really clear. I know, Dean, you were talking in the office just yesterday about how do first home buyers get in the market. What kind of, I think you were talking about a case of how you kind of worked with a client around. What was that approach?
So one of the incentives that the government's actually introduced is something called the First Home Saver Scheme, which what the government's allowed people to do is to actually contribute money into super, and then have that invested within the super fund, and then they can draw out up to around about 50,000 of the capital that's put in, as well as the interest associated with it. So the benefit around that is that the government's giving you an ability to, all the contributions that you're putting into super, we can claim a tax deduction on that. Okay. And then at the same time, we can then utilize that lump sum to be able to then buy something. When you come and look at it from the tax savings alongside the way that it's structured and things like that, it allows you to the clients to get there a little bit faster than traditionally just trying to put something on the side. So it's good value.
That sounds good. Any strategies along those lines from your perspective, John?
No, look, I think the fundamental ones available for a lot of small business owners. Often they've got young families coming through. A lot of the capital is tucked into that business. So I think it's very hard for the next generation coming through to basically tap into mum and dad's capital because it's sunk in a going concern. But look, I think there are lots of opportunities for innovation in this space. Something has to happen, otherwise first homes would be unattainable if we continue to see the cost grow.
The one big thing that as you mentioned with the Super Saver is, funny enough, the way, look, I don't know how I'm allowed to talk about this, but the way that they judge, because there's a income cap for getting into the schemes, right? I think it's 120. I think off the cuff 125,000 for an individual, and I believe it's 200 or 225. I can't remember exactly which one off the top of my head for a couple. But they've also opened up elements where you could buy with, a relative and things like that, which opens up, a lot more doors. But as you mentioned with the super scheme, is they look at the notice of assessment when they qualify you for that cap. When you're actually salary sacrificing, your taxable income drops by the amount of salary sacrifice you contribute. So somebody earning 130, 140, if they're sacrificing enough to get that income down to 125, they actually qualify. So people don't realize that. So, talking to your A team or the people around you, knowing these things is going to make a difference in your life.
I tell you what, I was just thinking just that, because I know this daughter that I'm speaking about as well. She's heard about it, but she goes, I started reading about it online. It feels really complex and I'm scared to pull the trigger. So yes, we really need to, speak with people like yourselves to really understand that fine tuning around it as well. And then if you're contributing it to super, how am I investing it in super if I'm going to be pulling it out? You know what I mean? Am I investing it in shares, or am I investing it in a different type of, because you have to make an asset choice inside super too. What are you kind of guiding clients on that? If they're going to be pulling it out in 2 years or 3 years,
it ultimately depends on how fast they're looking at buying something in there. I think the biggest concern as well is that obviously with superannuation, generally speaking, it's given that it's invested within the market, there's always going to be some form of volatility. Now, if we're going to be looking at buying something within the next couple of months and then putting it into the market, then the last thing we would want is that we put in all this money to get in there, and then obviously there's a bit of a dip in the market. So it's very, very important to manage the risk side of things when we do these types of strategies and sequencing it, so that they've still be able to obtain the benefit of putting it within super and claiming those deductions, but then there's not too much concern around the volatility within the market. So
it is complex.
In other words, speak to a subject matter expert.
Perfect. Pretty much.
That is a very good way to kind of solidify that as well. I might just go around the couch if there's any other comments around, things that you think are important for people to know that you're really discussing, with clients and customers that are coming in. Any tip or trick or something that you really want to get across before we close the episode? Dean?
Now, given the altitude of the clients that we've come and seen, I think it's very, very important before they look at doing anything. I think it's important to actually have a chat with their A team, whether that's their brokers, whether that's their advisors or anything like that, because I think that they will help the client get to the best possible solution. And once again, there's so many things that they might have access to, and because they don't entirely understand, and they may miss those particular opportunities. So I think having a chat with someone is also very important.
Analysis paralysis is what you spoke about.
Yeah.
Got that. Okay. Anything to add as well, Hung?
Look, I'm very, I'm one of those people who I guess I grew up in not so fortunate circumstances. So I've always been very selective of who I keep around myself or who I pick as part of my team. I always try to sniff to see if people are practicing what they preach, I guess. So if I'm going to pick someone, are they doing it themselves? Is this something that they've lived through or they've experienced or they've helped people with in the past? So ask those questions depending on who you're going to choose as your broker, as your financial planner, as your accountant, anything that's really very important in your financial decisions in life. You got to really understand what they've done also, ask those questions, talk to two. Talk to three if you have to. Obviously, don't waste too many people's time, but
But
at the same time, talk to a few and get it from a recommendation of someone you trust or seen has actually done it. That's what I could probably contribute to it, and you find that it goes a long way.
So really, you don't have to be technical when you're kind of approaching any one of you gentlemen for advice. It's like, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm after, this is what I think I want to do. Is this an area that you work in? Have you done it yourself as well? Is that kind of what you're saying? As simple as that.
That's it, very
But
simple.
being clear.
It could be a 3-4 minute conversation. You'll get a good feel, and like I could tell you, we could sit with someone in 2 or 3 minutes and change the complete algorithm of what their mindset was. Just like they tell us what they want and what they're thinking, and we go, mate, it's all wrong. And then it's not like
Yeah, no, that's great. Anything else to add, John?
I was
Before
going
we
to
close?
say, I think you both make excellent points. It's important to get a range of different perspectives, and there's no shame in asking different people with different functional expertise to take a position on a problem to solve. I think you see a lot of small business owners putting together a virtual board of directors for their business, someone representing law, someone who's an accountant, someone who's a mortgage broker. And there's no reason why we as individuals, when we treat our own balance sheet and wealth, shouldn't put a similar team together as well.
This was very enlightening, and you guys have absolutely segued to our next episode, and we're going to really be diving in with the same wonderful guests on the couch, really talking about what that A team is, what that board is, and why it works so well for clients and customers. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your insights, and hope you enjoyed the episode.